Hey guys, tonight, we're slipping into the shadows of 18th century Paris where revolution. The scent of wax and wine hangs heavy in dim salons. And a woman in crimson silk just walked through the door like she owns the place. You don't know her name yet. And honestly, you may never be sure it was real. But the moment she lifts her champagne glass and smiles at the man plotting to become emperor, you already know. This story is going to end in whispers, not headline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hear the fire crackling near your feet, but the real heat is across the room, where eyes are locking over candlelight. The year is 1795. France is wobbling like a drunken tightrope walker post-revolution chaos. Clash in ideals, powdered wigs replaced by blood-streaked cobblestones. You're standing in one of those underground salons where politics masquerades as poetry and nothing is quite as it seems. She wears red, because of course she does. Velvet, floor-length, with tiny gold buttons that catch the light every time she lifts her hand to adjust the lace at her collar. Her posture, impeccable. Her gaze, the kind that slices through silk. You don't know her name yet, but people around the room call her La Rose. A strange choice of moniker, considering real black roses don't actually exist in nature. But she does, and that's more surprising. She glides from guest to guest, a glass of wine in one hand, a fan in the other. Behind her, conversations curl like cigarette smoke. Revolutionary theory, military gossip, rumors about a short Corsican with a fondness for conquest. You catch snippets. They say he'll rule France by next year. No one rules France rules herself. I heard she slept with 2 members of the Directory and the Habsburg envoy. The other one vanished. That last voice belongs to a man whose cravat is too tight, and whose wife watches him a little too closely. The woman in red hears him, smiles faintly, and moves on. She's used to being a rumor. She's better at it than anyone. You take a closer look. Her fingers are burner rings. No ink stains. Yet she speaks 6 languages, dances like a duchess, and once corrected a diplomat's Latin. She shouldn't exist. But here she is. And now, she's turning toward the fireplace. Toward you. You try to blend it. Maybe you adjust your coat. Maybe you look down at your boots, dusty from the muddy Paris street. Doesn't matter. She sees you anyway. Do you read poetry? She asks. It's not really a question. It's a litmus test. You nod, because of course you do. Do you read between the lines? She adds. You nod again. Slower this time. She leans in. The heat of the fire merges with the heat of her breath. There's a revolution coming, she whispers. Not the loud kind. The quiet one. The one nobody writes songs about. And then she's gone. A flash of red disappearing into the next room, like the closing line of a poem you can't quite remember. Historians still argue whether she was even real. Some say she was a composite amalgam of several female spies, courtesans, and diplomats. Others think she was a British double agent, sent to sabotage Napoleon from within. A few even suggest she may have been a revolutionary priestess from Haiti, escaped to Paris under an assumed name. None of them agree. All of them are fascinated. Here's a strange but verifiable tidbit. In the National Archives, there's a classified document titled Only RN. The file was declassified briefly in the 1960s, then sealed again after a French historian tried to publish parts of it and mysteriously stopped writing mid-book. His notes simply end with, "She is not who I thought she was." But tonight, none of that matters. You're not flipping through footnotes or peering at redacted files. You're here, in a candlelit room, while the woman in red outsmarts every man who dares underestimate her. You follow like a shadow, and somewhere outside, in a forgotten corner of Paris, a young Corsican general hears her name for the first time and won't forget it. You're still in that smoky salon, still hearing the last notes of chamber music echo against the gold-trimmed walls, when you realize something odd. No one knows where La Rose Noire lives. She arrives at events unannounced, always perfectly dressed, never late. She leaves the same way, abruptly, mysteriously, and always before someone important says something they'll regret. You decide to ask around. A gossiping baroness claims she's the widow of a naval captain. A diplomat insists she's an exiled Russian countess. A third man whispers she was born in prison, smuggled out in a bread basket. They're all convinced. They're all wrong. What's real? Her name. That much is known. She signs letters as Claire Moreau, but even that raises eyebrows. In the census records, the handwriting doesn't match across years. The dates of birth differ. One entry lists her as another. Her accent is Parisian, except when she drinks too much champagne, and then it lilts into something more southern. You begin to suspect she's not hiding her past, she's editing it. But for someone supposedly born from obscurity, Claire or LaRose, or whoever she truly is, moves through the upper echelons of Paris with astonishing ease. She's invited to salons, royal balls, private duels, even she's the kind of person who can drop a quote from Virgil and a recipe for lemon tarts in the same sentence, and somehow make both sound like state secrets. One afternoon, she's spotted at the National, flipping through a book on Roman siege tactics. That same night, she dines with a Prussian diplomat whose army just happened to be planning a southern push. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether she was gathering information or planting it. And here's the quirky part. She always travels with a pet, never the same one twice. A black cat named Voltaire, a white ferret named Aristide, a parrot that cursed in Italian. They come and go like props in a stage play, charming distractions while something else moves behind the curtain. One of her more devoted acquaintances, a painter named Lucien, once tried to capture her likeness. He swore she posed for him 6 times, yet every time he tried to reproduce her eyes, he said they changed. Sometimes green, sometimes brown. Once, he swore, they looked gold. Eventually, he gave up and painted her wearing a mask. The painting still hangs in a private collection in Lyon, titled simply La Femme Qui N'est Pas, the woman who isn't. You begin to wonder if that's the whole point. She isn't a woman, she's a performance. A disappearing act. The trick. Keep your enemies guessing. And that's exactly what she does when she starts attending Republican military briefings. Even though no one can explain who invited her, she arrives wearing a blue sash typically reserved for widows of war. Kirozan speaks in clipped, confident tones. She questions maps. She critiques supply routes. And nobody stops her. Because when someone says, "Who is she?" the answer is always, "Don't you know?" That confidence becomes her shield. And her sword. Napoleon hasn't met her yet. Not properly. He's still climbing. Still charming ministers and terrifying enemies. With that signature cocktail of charisma and cannonballs. But she knows of him. Reads his letters. Watches his rise like a mathematician studying a curve. Predictable. Dangerous. Useful. In fact, she's already corrected one of his logistical plans anonymously, of course. A footnote on a stolen dispatch reroutes his troops around a bottleneck that could have ended in disaster. He thinks it was an aid. He's wrong. You've got to hand it to her. She isn't chasing fame. She's using the fog of war like a stage magician uses smoke cover for sleight of hand. Her real gift. She doesn't make you believe in her. She makes you doubt yourself. She walks into a room, and people forget their own agendas, their names, their wives. And the worst part, she never asks for anything. She simply listens. Until the moment she doesn't. And that silence is when the real damage is done. Still, even she isn't invisible to everyone. There is a woman older, sharper, colder who watches her from the shadows of each salon. You spot her a few times, always wearing gray. No name, no introductions. Just the occasional stare that lingers too long. Rival, handler, who knows? But the woman in gray isn't fooled. And neither are you, anymore. Because as the music swells and the candles flicker, you realize something chilling. Claire Moreau doesn't exist, but someone wearing her name just gave orders to a general. The Kasukan general arrives in Paris, like a whirlwind in a library. Loud, restless, brilliant, and entirely unaware that he's already being studied from behind a wineglass. You don't meet Napoleon Bonaparte in this story, you overhear him. Arguing with ministers, barking at mapmakers, charm ambushing widows in velvet gloves. He's shorter than you imagined. Sure. But his energy fills whatever room he walks into, like gunpowder fills a barrel, pressurized, and just waiting for a spark. Claire, or whatever name she's using this week, takes one look at him and smiles, like she already knows how the story ends. Not with a guillotine, not even with an empire, but with her vanishing just before he thinks he's won. Napoleon, for his part, doesn't quite know what to make of her. Their first official meeting happens at a post-opera reception. The music has faded, the champagne is warm, and Bonaparte is arguing with a mathematician about supply lines. Claire slides between conversations like a dancer on marble. "You're wrong about your map," she says, casually, folding her fan shut with a snap. He turns, blinks. Not used to being interrupted, not used to being corrected by a woman. Am I? He replies. And that smirk is the closest thing he has to charm. She nods, gestures toward the map he's just scrawled on a linen napkin. That past floods in spring. You'd lose your wagons and half your mules. Do you know this? I've seen it, she says. From a monastery window. It's not true, but it sounds beautiful. And more importantly, it works. He pauses, studies her. Most people flinch under that stare. She does not. From that moment, she's in his head. A curiosity, a distraction, a threat he can't quite name, and she never gives him enough information to be sure. Historians still argue whether they were lovers. There are no letters, no portraits of the two together, but there is a cryptic diary entry in Napoleon's hand. Roses have thorns, some bleed ink. That's it. One line, no context. Of course, Claire's own records are even more frustrating. In a letter to a friend half burned, only the top half legible, she writes. He is not unhandsome, just unknowing, like a child holding a flintlock. A fringe theory suggests she deliberately sabotaged his marriage plans to Josephine. But a broken carriage, a misplaced letter, and a sudden illness at the exact wrong moment left Napoleon pacing outside a church with no bride inside for an hour. Coincidence. You're starting to realize Claire doesn't do coincidence. There's another, stranger story. During a closed-door strategy session, Napoleon pauses mid-sentence and says, "Someone's listening." The room is cleared. Walls checked. No sign of anyone, except for a lavender hairpin found under the table. Claire's hair never smelled like lavender, unless she wanted it to. You watched their dance unfold across smoky rooms and moonlit gardens. She appears, disappears, sometimes seated next to his enemies, sometimes pretending to be deaf when he's ranting about Prussia, always watching. And here's your quirky moment. Napoleon once commissioned a mechanical parrot from a Swiss craftsman. It could repeat phrases. It was supposed to sit in his war tent, mocking enemy names. The parrot never arrived. It vanished. En route, a year later, Claire shows up at a diplomat's suit. The parrot answers. Same voice, same phrases. Everyone laughs. But you shiver. She didn't steal the parrot. She rerouted it for fun, or maybe as a message. You start to feel sorry for him. In a way, Napoleon, for all his power, for all his tactical genius, never once realizes the chessboard he's playing on was rearranged the moment she walked into the room. She never outright deceives him. She doesn't have to. She just lets him underestimate her. And when he finally does try to find her really slip through his fingers like ash in the wind. Because the most dangerous people don't hide behind masks. They hand you the mask and make you wear it. The teacup is porcelain, white with a fine blue rim, and you're watching it tremble ever so slightly in the hands of a man who once led troops into cannon fire without blinking. He's not afraid of war. He's afraid of what might be folded inside that tea napkin. Claire sits across from him, smiling like it's just another Tuesday. This is no ordinary tea party. It's a transfer of power, sealed with sugar cubes and clever lies. You're inside a neutral townhouse in the Marais district. Outside, Paris swirls with rumors of betrayals and broken alliances. But in here, espionage smells like but she pours. He sweats. Somewhere, behind a curtained door, another man waits for his cue. His name isn't important. They rarely are. What matters is the letter he holds diplomatic, stolen, sealed with the crest of the Austrian court. Claire nods once. That's the signal. The man slips out. Across the street, a courier will receive the letter and carry it not to Vienna, but to a contact in Marseille. 2 days later, a shipment of munitions never arrives, and no one knows why except her. Historians still argue whether Claire was working for the British, the Austrians, or simply for herself. The truth is murkier. Sometimes she works for France. Sometimes she works against it. But always she works towards something no one else can see. You're about to discover how deep the game goes. Later that night, she attends a masquerade thrown by a wealthy merchant's wife. The music is loud. The masks are elaborate. And Claire wears a domino cloak, the color of spilled ink. She slips through the crowd like I thought you can't quite finish. At one point, she leans in close to a Prussian officer and whispers something about a shipment delay. His face goes pale. By morning, 2 of his men have deserted. Here's a detail historians love to quote. She never writes things down. No code books. No intercepted orders with her handwriting. Instead, she trains others to remember. 14-year-old street boys. blind musicians, florists who recite dates through flower arrangements. You think that sounds far-fetched? One British officer swore she once delivered an entire strategic update using the names of cake ingredients in a bakery window. Almond, lemon, cassis, cinnamon. When rearranged by an aide familiar with the cipher, it spelled out Marseille. The message led to the capture of a spy network. The bakery burned down a week later. Quirky fact of the night. Claire was once seen feeding pigeons in the Tuileries Gardens with dyed breadcrumbs. Purple, yellow, red. The colors weren't random. They matched a code used by Jacobin sympathizers to signal safe meeting points. Only 2 people noticed. One of them died in a duel. The other married her. Don't get excited, he was dead 6 months later. Malaria, they say. But the letter he left behind calls her my uncatchable compass. A romantic way to describe someone who changed direction every time you tried to follow. Back to the tea. One of Napoleon's aides, a man named Fournier, grows suspicious. He starts following Claire. Bad move. She lets him tailor for 3 days. Always just far enough to give him hope. Then she leads him to a locked gate. Montmartre waits, smiles, then vanishes into the building while a butcher's boy accidentally spills a basket of raw meat on Fournier's boots. When he finally gets inside, all he finds is a tiny room with a broken kettle and a torn newspaper clipping circled in charcoal. Information is never free, but confusion is cheap. Fournier resigns 3 weeks later. Historians don't know where she got her training. Some say she learned from an Italian courtesan who once blackmailed a bishop. Others believe she was mentored by a Swiss banker turned spy master who vanished in 1790. One theory claims she was educated in a convent that specialized in teaching girls how to read lips in 6 languages. Another theory, she trained herself, because when you grow up on lies and shadows, truth becomes a language you invent as you go. By now, you realize something bigger is brewing. These tea meetings, these disappearing letters, they're not just mischief. They're movements, like shifting a single chess piece to force a series of blunders 3 moves later. And Claire, she's already 6 moves ahead. You start to feel like everyone else in this story is sleepwalking. Couriers, officers, even Napoleon. They all play their roles, carry their orders, react to chaos like it's weather. But she writes, the candles are burning low again. Somewhere across the city, a letter is being read. It has no signature, but a black rose is pressed between the pages, and you already know what that means. You're standing in a Vienna ballroom that smells like melted wax and expensive nerves. The music is flawless, the chandelier is blinding, and the gloves embroidered, perfumed, and in this case, dangerously misplaced. Claire is here, of course. She's wearing ivory tonight, a color that makes her seem almost harmless. But you know better now. This particular night, a high-ranking Austrian count discovers that one of his gloves has gone missing. No one panics about a glove. Not unless it's lined with microfilm, or in this case, coated ink. Hidden beneath the silk stitching is a phrase that, when moistened, reveals troop movements along the Italian front. The glove isn't an accessory, it's a grenade. The scandal is small, but sharp. Rumors fly like ballroom waltzers. Spies, lovers, traitors in velvet. But no one can quite figure out how the glove got from his dressing chamber to the inside pocket of a French S overcoat. You know how Claire brushed past both of them in the span of 30 seconds and smiled. Historians still argue whether the glove's contents were legitimate. Some say it was a decoy. Others believe it directly influenced Napoleon's spring campaign, delaying Austria's push into Lombardy. But a copy of the embroidery turned up years later in a brothel ledger, under unpaid debts. Here's your quirky detail for the night. Claire never owned more than 3 dresses at a time. Witnesses describe her in red, ivory, and one strangely in green so dark it looked black. Yet each dress was altered constantly. Her tailor claims she gave instructions in verse, one's rhyming sleeves like midnight with buttons of spite. Anyway, back to Vienna. The cop with the glove isn't arrested. He's politely invited to leave. 3 days later, he's offered a minor ambassadorship in Lisbon. Claire sends flowers to his hotel suite. The card says, hands can be slippery things. You watch her work the room like a violin. Every gesture, every glance calibrated. She knows who's watching. She knows who thinks they're not being watched. And when she finally dances, it's not with anyone of importance. It's with the 3rd son of a minor Bavarian noble. Why? Because his father owns a shipping company, and 2 of those ships just rerouted under false manifests to a port near. Coincidence? Claire doesn't do coincidence. You see her pause by the refreshment table, inspecting candied almonds with the same intensity she uses to read military reports. A small nod, a flick of her wrist, and a servant carries a message hidden in a linen napkin to someone waiting in the garden. You follow, of course. Out there, the air is cool and thick with roses. The man receives the napkin, unfolds it, reads the single word. Invert. That's it. Nothing else. But that word reverses the position of an artillery company meant to reinforce an outpost. That word causes a delay. That word saves lives or maybe ends them. Depends on your side. You begin to understand. Claire isn't trying to win the war. She's trying to steer it. Not toward peace, necessarily. Toward something more personal, more private. Historians still puzzled over her motives. Patriotism doesn't seem to fit. Nor greed. She lived modestly, avoided titles, and once turned down a duchy with a laugh. Too many rooms, she said. Some believe she was hunting a man. Others say she was protecting one. A few believe she simply loved the game more than the outcome. You're not sure anymore, but you can feel it under the glamour, the gowns, the gloves. She's shaping history with the softest possible touch. At the end of the night, she vanishes early. Not because of scandal, because she never stays past the third waltz. It's her rule. And hours later, when servants sweep the ballroom, someone finds a single glove tucked beneath a chair. Not the Austrians, not the S, hers, and stitched into the cuff, almost too fine to see, is a phrase in Latin. Nollivis, no step backward. The painter sets up his easel in silence. The studio smells of turpentine, beeswax, and the faint citrusy ghost of perfume left behind from her last visit. Cliff, that's what she's calling herself this week, poses in a high-backed chair, perfectly still, perfectly unreadable. You're off to the side, watching. The painter, a man named Emile with wild hair and bad knees, is sweating. Not from the heat, from the pressure. This isn't just a portrait, it's a contract, a test, maybe even a trap. Claire is wearing navy simple. No jewelry, no distracting feathers or fans, just a look in her eyes that suggests she knows things you don't want her to say out loud. Emile dips his brush into ochre and begins. At first, it goes well. Cheekbones, hair, the gentle curve of her jaw. But when he gets to the eyes, he stops, frowns, wipes his brow, starts again. Then again, after the third try, he throws down his brush and mutters something about sorcery. You peek over his shoulder and you see what he means. In each attempt, her eyes are different, not just in shape, but in tone. One looks amused, the next, furious, the third, blank, like staring into a pond that hides a leviathan beneath. Claire laughs quietly. Perhaps I'm only real in candlelight, she says. She poses for 6 sittings, each one stranger than the last. One day, she arrives as a duchess, another as a governess, once even in a military greatcoat with boots caked in mud. Emile keeps painting. The result, a half-dozen unfinished canvases and a nervous twitch in his left eyelid. Historians still argue whether the final painting is truly her. The only finished portrait now hangs in a private study in Bordeaux, hidden from public view. It's unsigned. Its subject wears a velvet cloak and a jeweled brooch, but the face is obscured by a laced veil. And here's your quirky twist. Beneath the layers of paint confirmed by infrared scans, a second image lurks. One of a different woman entirely. Blonde, smiling, holding a black rose. Did Claire pose as someone else? Or was someone else posing as Claire? No one knows. And Claire never said, but she did leave Emile a note the day she vanished from his studio. Paint what you fear most, and you'll find me. You want to believe she was just playing with him, but Emile's later work turns dark, nightmarish. All his female subjects look vaguely like her, and none have faces. Now, let's rewind. The year is 1797. Napoleon has begun to make real noise victories in Italy. He's no longer just a general. He's a symbol, and symbols are dangerous, especially to people like Claire. She stops attending major events, slips into quieter clothes, darker corners, but her influence grows. At the Royal Academy, a coded sculpture appears, a reclining figure with a scroll across her lap. Nothing unusual until you notice. The scroll bears musical notation, a lullaby, that, when played backward, marches a series of encrypted troop commands issued the week before. Who sculpted it? No records, but the clay was ordered under the name Mademoiselle Moreau. Meanwhile, a pamphlet circulates through Paris. Anonymous, sharp, funny. It accuses Napoleon of vanity, calling him the Corsican peacock in borrowed feathers. The pamphlet's phrasing mimics a poem Claire once recited at a party. Back when people still thought she was just a pretty guest with good Latin. You're beginning to understand her artistry isn't limited to Deceptionite's layered, recursive, aesthetic. She doesn't just hide, she curates. And the portrait, that, too, is a message, a warning, maybe, or a mirror, or just a joke, on the men who think capturing her image is the same as capturing her. One of Napoleon's advisors commissions a sketch artist to reproduce the Bordeaux painting. The artist returns shaking, says the face changed while he was drawing, ripped up his work and never touched charcoal again. Claire, if she ever hears about this, would have laughed, because to her, portraits are a trap for small minds. And the truth, the real truth, is never still. It begins with silence. No goodbyes, no farewell parties. One morning, Claire is simply gone. Her apartment, if you can call it that, is swept clean. The only thing left behind is a cracked teacup on the windowsill and a scrap of a theater ticket with a wine stain that smells faintly of lilac. You retrace her steps. Everyone does. The salon regulars, the generals, the painters, the spies, pretending not to be spies. They all ask the same question. Where is she? Nobody knows. The woman who had slipped in and out of diplomatic circles like wind through a curtain, who seemed to be in 3 places at once, and always arrived just before the first cannon sounded, has vanished. But you know better. Disappearance is not a retreat. It's her finest move. Here's where it gets strange. Shortly after Claire disappears, several letters arrive across Paris unsigned, written in her familiar looping script. Each contains only a single phrase. Check your ink. Most people ignore it, but a certain ambassador's assistant examines his ink, dips a finger in, and finds the ink mixed with powdered graphite perfect for revealing hidden etchings. He scrubs the bottom of his desk and finds a diagram of the French troop positions around the Alps. It's 6 days old, still accurate. He burns the desk and quits the service the next morning. Historians still argue whether this marked the end of her Paris years, or the beginning of something new. Some say she fled to Brussels, others claim she boarded a ship from Marseille under the name Madame. One man insists he saw her buying lemons in Lisbon, wrapped in a scarf and humming a Corsican lullaby. But one thing becomes clear. Napoleon starts losing sleep. She's no longer in the salons. She's no longer sending veiled jabs in poetry journals or placing odd symbols in flower shop windows. She's nowhere, and yet her absence makes him cautious. He starts doubling his couriers. His food tasted twice. Issues direct orders that no one else is to receive. One of his generals remarks, he fears shadows more than sabers. Here's your quirky tidbit. Shortly after, Claire vanishes. A rumor spreads among the French elite about a mysterious woman who appears in dreams. Not just one person. Dozens they all describe the same figure: velvet cloak, faint perfume of cloves, a smile that never reaches her eyes. They call her La Femme de Nulle Part, the woman from nowhere. And now, something even more curious. A forged document begins circulating, Napoleon sealed, but not his signature. It claims France is planning to invade Denmark. Chaos ensues. Troops are The truth comes out 2 weeks later. The forgery is exquisite, almost perfect. Almost there's a mistake. A Latin phrase, slightly misquoted. The same phrase Claire once recited to you in that smoky salon quem. De diligent. Adolescens merita, whom the gods love, dies young. Claire would never have gotten it wrong. Which means she wanted to be found out. She's playing a longer game now. One from the shadows. One where her presence is implied, never confirmed. The forgery isn't an attack, it's a signature. A wink across a battlefield. By now, you realize something important. Claire doesn't need to be seen to be felt. You start to see her echoes. In the way generals hesitate. In the sudden rise of anonymous poetry mocking Napoleon's rise. In the whispered fears of the woman who knows too much. She's not a person anymore. She's become a legend. And that is more dangerous than anything she could do in person. Because legends don't need passports. They don't need food. They don't bleed. They just endure. And somewhere perhaps in a quiet convent near the border, or behind a mask at a Venetian masquerade, she smiles. Because this is exactly how she planned it. To vanish not as a woman, but as a force. You're stepping off a boat in Alexandria now, squinting into the brutal Egyptian sun. Your boots crunching against sand that feels like powdered glass. The air smells of spices, sea brine, and history older than memory. And you're not alone. Whispers follow you through the port. The veiled woman has returned. You hear it in French, Arabic, even a mangled version in Italian. Always the same woman, always the same story. She wears a linen cloak, face covered in gauze against the sun, her footsteps silent. But she doesn't blend in. She never blends in. French, officers tired, sunburned, paranoid, go silent when she walks by. One of them swears she read a hieroglyphic inscription out loud in perfect pronunciation. Another says she cursed a donkey cart in Arabic, and it flipped over 5 minutes later. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt is ambitious, overreaching, and already beginning to fray at the edges. And you start to see Claire's fingerprints on the seams. She's not working from within this time, she's weaving just outside his reach. She moves through marketplaces in silence, leaves notes inside baskets of figs, bribes messengers with fragments of ancient scrolls. A cracked oil lamp with a note stuffed inside. Salt the supply lines, then vanish. And here's your quirky historical detail. One of Napoleon's scientists, yes, he brought scientists to Egypt, because why not? Recorded that someone had left an accurate diagram of the Nile Delta inside a papyrus scroll that wasn't carbon dated to antiquity. Meaning, someone made it look ancient. But the modern, guess who? She's living among scholars and thieves, merchants and mystics. Her language shifts with her clothing. Sometimes she poses as a French widow seeking relics. Sometimes as a translator for a Greek merchant fleet. Always listening. Historians still debate how she got there. No ship manifests, no passports. But one French naval record notes a woman boarded disguised as a male physician, Dr. He gave no lectures. Disembarked before Alexandria. Never seen again. And now, something even stranger. A French artillery captain writes home about a dream he had. In it, a veiled woman hands him a lantern and says, "Beware the desert moon." The next night, his patrol is ambushed near the ruins of Saqqara under a full moon. He survives, tells everyone about the dream woman. His letter is dismissed as but 3 other soldiers write of similar dreams in the same week. You're starting to suspect dreams are just another one of her tools. One afternoon, you find yourself in the shadow of an obelisk. A group of officers sits nearby. A woman drifts past them. One sketcher glances up, does a double take, and begins sketching her instead. When he looks down at the page, his eyes go wide. Not because of what he drew, but because the image had already been there. A perfect silhouette, already inked in before he began. He burns the sketchbook that night. Meanwhile, Napoleon's forces are unraveling. Food shortages, guerrilla resistance, and amidst it all, stories of the veiled woman swirled like desert sand. She walks into an abandoned mosque at night, lights a single candle. In the morning, the imam finds a map drawn on the back wall in Hennedaling, the location of French gunpowder cache. By noon, they've been looted. She's not just sabotaging, she's predicting, preempting, and when you finally spot her, truly see her, it's in a Cairo marketplace, between stalls selling brass and dates and linen. She's standing perfectly still, watching a French officer buy a scimitar he'll never learn to use. You make eye contact. Her eyes don't match. One green, one brown. She nods once, almost swallowed by the color, the heat, the crowd. Back at headquarters, Napoleon paces, angry, tired. He's lost a courier, a guide, an entire shipment of medical supplies. His maps don't match the terrain anymore. His men whisper about shadows, about sabotage, about a woman who reads the stars. He orders an investigation, finds nothing. Then someone places a scroll on his desk. No signature, just one phrase. "You forgot I read Latin too." He doesn't sleep that night. You're standing on a quiet dock in the dead of night. The kind where the only sounds are creaking wood and waves licking barnacled hulls. The ship before you is sleek, low-slung, painted darker than the sky, and by all records should not exist. Her name is L'Eclipse, and tonight, she's leaving Alexandria under a moonless sky. You're not supposed to be here, neither is she. Claire walks up the gangplank like it's a ballroom staircase. No hesitation, no luggage, just a rolled-up scrawl, a lapis amulet around her neck, and that same knowing smirk that has haunted half of Europe. The sailors don't ask her name. They don't need to. The captain, a lanky man with a limp and a spyglass, made from 2 stolen candles, sticks salutes up. "Dr. Noir," he says, "playing the old game." She nods. Game on. This ship, it's not part of the French fleet. Not technically. It was ordered decommissioned 6 months ago, stripped for parts, burned, officially. Yet here it is, reborn like a ghost, slipping out of harbor with the breeze in her sails, and a cargo hold filled with crates labeled app. You already know they're not app. Historians still argue over the purpose of Leclerc. Some think it was meant to extract a key officer from Egypt. Others believe it carried ancient scrolls stolen from the Library of Cairo. One wild theory even claims the ship transported a live mummy, although that probably says more about Victorian imaginations than historical fact. But one thing's clear. Claire is at the center of it. She disappears from Alexandria just as French forces begin falling apart. Days later, Napoleon's private journal mentions a leak in the Eastern Corridor, followed by an entire paragraph that's been scratched out so violently. Though on board the ship, Claire spends her time in the captain's quarters, poring over maps, not of Europe, but of coastlines and currents. She's plotting not destinations, but you catch a glimpse of one parchment with 3 identical shipping routes. All false. One sailor jokes that she navigates by moonlight and luck. Another says she talks 2 stars in Greek. One swears she fed a wounded gull, stitched its wing, and sent it off with a note tied to its leg. The next morning, a patrol boat turned away from intercepting eclipses, if guided by invisible hands. Quirky fact of the night. Claire never touches the compass. Not once. Says compasses lie. Instead, she strings black beads along the deck rail, moving them each sunrise, tracking something only she understands. A rhythm of wind and tide, perhaps, or something deeper. One night, a junior deckhand tries to sneak into her quarters. Claims he was just curious. He's found the next morning standing at the bow, eyes wide, whispering, "She knew my name," over and over. He never speaks again. You start to suspect L'Eclipse isn't just a ship, it's a stage. And Claire is putting on her greatest act yet. When the vessel finally docks in Trieste, the crates are gone. So is she. The captain files no report. The crew disperses. The ship is stripped and scuttled 2 weeks later, its keel repurposed for a tavern floor. But stories leak. A French officer in Venice receives a letter with a pressed black rose and a torn fragment of a sea chart. A diplomat in Zurich finds a coded message inside his boot. A banker in Genoa swears his fortune doubled overnight after a veiled woman gave him advice on grain prices. Each of them, in their own way, helps shift the tides. A trade route closes. A loan defaults. A marriage ends in scandal. Claire, she's nowhere, yet everything moves with her absence. Napoleon hears whispers of the ghost ship and the veiled woman who charted it. He denies it publicly. Privately, he doubles his naval security and commissions to new spy networks. He even orders a replica of L'Eclipse built. But here's the catch. The blueprints for that replica, altered by one line. A minor adjustment to the rudder design that renders it useless in high winds. Guess who changed it? The new ship never leaves port. You stand now at the harbor where L'Eclipse disappeared, staring into the sea and realizing something terrifying. She's relooked, and wherever she's going next, the storm will follow. Venice is rotting sweetly in the summer heat. The canals smell like old wine and moss. The palazzos sag under the weight of secrets, and behind one of those half-dripped windows, Claire's already planning her next performance. You don't see her arrive. No one ever does. But you do hear about the feast. A masquerade. They call it lavish. Over the top. Hosted by a minor noble with too much money and too little discretion. The guest list reads like a scandal. Spies, poets, and at least 2 mistresses pretending to be countesses. But it's the masked woman in silver who steals every eye and every secret. Claire wears a mask shaped like a moth, not a butterfly, a moth. The kind drawn to flame. It's too poetic, not to be deliberate. She says little, eats less, and dances just once, gliding through the ballroom like music-wearing skin. And then, just as dessert is served, a nobleman slumps forward into his custard and dies with his eyes wide open. Panic. Screaming. Guards flood in. Swords drawn. No one leaves. Not yet. You watch as Claire, still masked, picks up a linen napkin, calmly wipes the edge of her goblet, and places it upside down on the table. Then she vanishes into the crush of guests like ink into water. The poison is traced to the wine. Historians still argue whether the glass was meant for her, or from her. And here's where it gets weird. The nobleman had just returned from Vienna, carried with him a satchel of letters from Austrian diplomats. One of those letters now mysteriously missing contained terms for a secret accord between Austria and Russia. Guess who might have had an interest in keeping that from Napoleon? Venice police search for Claire. They question the gondoliers, the barkeeps, the silk vendors. One describes a woman who paid with a coin that turned out to be made of soap. Another says she left a tip in the form of a dried flower sealed in wax. A rose. Black. Again. The coroner, meanwhile, makes a note. The poison used was rare, derived from a Balkan mushroom known only to a handful of herbalists, and one obscure convent outside the same convent where, according to rumor, a French teacher had spent several months the year before. You know who? Now here's your quirky tidbit. The ballroom where the poisoner struck. Closed for investigation the next day. When they pull back the curtains, they find every mirror in the place has been etched with a single phrase so faint it's almost invisible. To burn brightly. Extinguish gently. No one sees her again for 2 weeks. But her name, if it was her name, pops up in strange places. A ledger in a Venetian apothecary lists a purchase under Mali. Cordigu Moreau. A gondola receipt signed Morph. A dressmaker claims she delivered a cloak sewn with silk maps into the lining. Each clue vanishes before it can be verified. You'd finally catch sight of her again on a narrow bridge near the Grand Canal. She's feeding the pigeons with what looks like lavender breadcrumbs. Wearing grey this time. No mask. No smile. A child walks past her with a tin music box. She drops a coin inside. The tune it plays isn't one you recognize. But 3 days later, you hear it again played by a street musician in Turin. That melody encodes troop movement through the Alps. Historians still argue how much influence she had over Napoleon's northern campaign. But here's what we do know. He delayed movement by 6 days following the Venetian poisoning. And in those 6 days, a key Russian division went missing from the front. Vanished. Just like her. Napoleon begins to suspect. Begins to hunt. He sends out a quiet command. Identify the woman. End her games. But you and I both know, isn't a game anymore. It's an opera. And she's writing the final act. The invitations are printed on thick cream paper, sealed with a crest that doesn't actually belong to any real royal house though. It certainly looks like it should. You hold one now, admiring the gold ink, the confident script. You're invited to the wedding of Baroness Claire Moreau and Prince Leopold of Prussia. Of course you are. By now, Claire has reinvented herself. No more veils, no coded fans, no disappearing into alley. This time, she stands boldly in salons and royal gardens, radiating the kind of elegance that makes people forget to ask inconvenient questions. And this Leopold, he's handsome, gallant, and far too trusting. A distant cousin to the Prussian king, with a modest title and a major role in negotiations between Prussia and France. He speaks 5 languages, knows nothing of cryptography, wears his heart like a medal. They say it's a whirlwind romance. They say she saved his life from a runaway carriage. They say she fell for him instantly. You know better. You've been watching her too long not to see the patterns beneath the petals. Historians still argue whether she truly intended to marry him. Some claim she loved him. Others believe he was merely her ticket into a certain vault of state secrets she hadn't yet accessed. Whatever the truth, the preparations go smoothly. Too smoothly. The Prussian court is charmed. French diplomats nervous, but hopeful begin to treat the union as a symbol of a union of elegance and empire. The wedding is set to take place at a sprawling chateau outside. The guest list includes ambassadors, nobles, generals, even a rumored French spy, planted by Napoleon himself, under orders to observe and contain. The morning of the ceremony, Claire vanishes. Her chambers are untouched. The dress laid out, jewelry gleaming, a pair of gloves still pinned with pearl-tipped needles. On the pillow, a note. 1 sentence. Forgive me for not saying goodbye. Prince Leopold is found sitting alone in the empty chapel, holding the engagement ring. He says nothing, refuses to speak for 2 days. When he finally does, all he says is, she left before the music started. Rumors spread instantly. Some say she was kidnapped. Others think she was assassinated by the French, or perhaps by the Prussians once they realized what she knew. A few whisper that she faked the entire engagement just to gain access to Prussian troop logistics. And here's your quirky detail. The orchestra hired for the wedding played anyway. An empty ceremony, an empty aisle. But when the string quartet began, their first piece on arrangement of a popular Prussian ballad, one of the cellists discovered a series of notations etched into their sheet music. When deciphered, they spelled out, reverse column formation, deploy west. 3 weeks later, a Prussian regiment repositions quietly along a critical French border. No official explanation, just a quiet shift that would later delay Napoleon's offensive by a crucial 48 hours. Coincidence? You already know the answer. The French spy embedded at the chateau vanishes the following morning. His room contains only a single object, a torn wedding program with a black moth stamped in wax. Napoleon, upon receiving word of the failed wedding, reportedly says nothing, just draws a line through a name in one of his notebooks. A name no one else sees. Historians still debate how she escaped. There were guards, checkpoints, dogs, but no one saw her leave. One stable hand swears he saw a cloaked figure mount a chestnut horse moments before dawn, riding into the mist. Another claims she escaped disguised as a florist. The third says she simply vanished into thin air. And you're beginning to suspect Claire never intended to marry anyone. Because for someone like her, freedom isn't a choice, it's a compulsion, an art, a mission. The day after the wedding that wasn't, a Prussian envoy receives a bouquet of white orchids. No card, no explanation, just a folded scrap of parchment tucked among the stems. It reads, "A crown is just a leash in gold." You're sitting in a smoky tavern now, somewhere in Lyon, listening to a love song you've heard 100 times before. But tonight, something feels off. The tune is lilting, soft. The lyrics simple, romantic, forgettable. Yet, as the refrain rolls around again, you realize the words aren't quite right. Beneath the bridge, my lover waits. No, that's not how it usually goes. You lean in closer, and that's when it hits you. Every third word, when written down, spells a pattern, a location, a date, a warning. You grab a pencil, scribble on a coaster. When you're done, it reads, "Artillery ambush, Western Ridge, the 14th of May. This song is everywhere. In taverns, on street corners, whistled by soldiers, and sung by milkmaids. It's catchy. It travels faster than any courier. And it's not the only one. Historians still argue whether Claire wrote the original lyrics, or merely adapted them. But this much is known. Within 2 weeks, the French army adjusts its position near the Rhine. And just in time, a surprise Austrian flank is thwarted. The general in charge claims divine providence, but you know the truth sang itself into his ears. Claire's back, and now she's writing sheet music. Here's your quirky tidbit. A music box found in a Berlin pawn shop plays a melody nearly identical to the Lion tune. But when played backward, it matches the opening bars of a military march used only by a secret Prussian battalion. The box was carved with tiny roses and signed underneath with a single word. Night, you begin tracing the songs, each one tied to movements, each melody a map. She's turned culture into a courier. Some of the songs are lullabies. One tells the tale of a girl waiting for her soldier by the river X. The dates in the lyrics match troop deployments near the Danube. Another, disguised as a folk ballad about lost love, maps the locations of safe houses in northern France. The chorus always ends on a high note, which according to one royalist defector was the symbol for message received. And the instruments, they're just as strange. A traveling violinist in Genoa swears he was paid handsomely to perform a particular tune only when a man in grey lit his cigar. When asked who paid him, he shrugged and said, "A woman with 2 different eyes, one green, one gold." Napoleon hears the songs too. They reach his ears like phantom whispers. He's told they're harmless, folk nonsense. But one of his aides warns him otherwise. She's using melody as a weapon, the aide says. We should counter. He orders a new patriotic anthem, loud, heroic, full of horns and drums. It flops. Soldiers hum Claire's tunes instead. In a desperate attempt to control the spread, Napoleon bans unauthorized performances. Music halls are raided, street musicians questioned, sheet music burned. But you can't burn memory. The songs live on, hummed by women washing laundry, whistled by boys skipping stones. They're not just beautified, they're functional. One verse marks the arrival of munitions. Another signals a rendezvous. The quiet ones, they're lullabies with teeth. And you start to hear her voice in all of them. Late one night, you walk past a church choir. The girls are singing a hymn you don't recognize. It rises and falls in haunting tones. But the final line, soft, almost whispered, makes your skin crawl. The emperor walks blind, trailing blood on borrowed boots. Nobody notices, except you. The choir leader, when questioned, claims the song was old, passed down. No idea where it came from. Of course not. By now, Claire's not just writing the songs. She is the song, a myth with verses, a shadow with sheet music, moving unseen through cities, her lyrics reshaping front lines more efficiently than 100 sabers. Napoleon orders his intelligence officers to investigate the source. They come back with nothing, except one cryptic note tucked inside a violin case. Silence has its own rhythm. And somewhere maybe in a quiet opera box in Vienna, or a vineyard in Marseille, a woman with mismatched eyes pours herself a glass of wine and hums softly to herself. Because a bullet can be stopped, but a song lingers. The lantern flickers weakly in your hand as you descend deeper into the Paris catacombs. The air turns cold and still, thick with the smell of damp stone, forgotten prayers, and something more metallic like the ghost of gunpowder and old iron. You didn't choose to be down here. You followed a trail. 3 red chalk X's on crumbling walls. A slip of paper folded inside a bottle of absinthe. A whisper from a street urchin. She's beneath the city now. So here you are, stepping over bones, ducking under arches of stacked skulls, your breath catching in your throat. And just when you're sure you've taken a wrong turn, you hear it. Footsteps. Not yours. Then a voice low, melodic, unmistakably amused. "You're late," she says. Claire stands beneath a crumbling inscription. "Arrayed," says ICI, hooded, robed in rough cloth. The candlelight catches the edge of a dagger tucked into her sachet. You don't need to ask which. She turns, leading you deeper through a passage lined with femurs. A secret chamber opens, revealed by a loose jawbone used like a latch. You step inside. What you see next doesn't feel like history. It feels like a dream someone else had. A table, a map of Paris, drawn in ink and soot, tiny metal figurines, mark locations, bridges, government buildings, garrisons, some tipped over, others circled and waxed. And next to the map, a small wooden box. Claire opens it. Inside, 3 rings, a miniature portrait, and a broken compass. "Everything I needed," she says. You're not sure if she means for the mission, or for revenge. Historians still argue whether this meeting in the catacombs ever took place. Some believe it was the final showdown between Claire and a rival, a man known only in records as Le Chien, the Black Dog. Others say it was a handoff, a final intelligence transfer that would dismantle an entire French spy network. But there is one curious fact. A retired general, years later, claimed in his memoirs that he received an anonymous dossier containing a complete list of double agents embedded in the French army. The document was but it arrived in a wooden box matching the one described by a priest who once saw Claire enter Notre Dame, wearing a monk's robe. The same box now sits in a private collection, still unopened. Here's your quirky detail. The catacombs had been illegally mapped 3 years before by a group of amateur cartographers who called themselves Les Tops de Moles. Their leader, a woman using the alias Véronique M., who once wrote an article in a local gazette on the geometry of escape. The diagrams she drew match Claire's known handwriting. As you and Claire linger in the silence of that underground chamber, she takes something from her robe, a coin. Not just any coin. It's smooth on one side, engraved on the other, with a black rose and the word Encore. Again, she flips it to you. "Next time, take the longer route," she says, and smiles. Then she walks away, deeper into the catacombs. You call out. She doesn't turn back. You try to follow, but after the next bend, nothing. Just silence, bones, darkness, and her scent lavender. You emerge hours later, blinking in the sunlight like you've returned from another world. Because maybe you have. That week, strange things happen. A key French informant disappears. A coded message in a wine label leads to the dismantling of a surveillance ring in the south. And in Montmartre, a chapel candle burns for 3 days straight without melting. No one sees Claire, but everyone feels her. And when a Paris bookseller discovers a Latin phrase etched inside a hollowed-out copy of the Aeneid, scholars argue for decades over its meaning. I came to end the things men begin in arrogance. It begins, fittingly, with a uniform. Not Claire's, of course. She never needed one. But the uniform she wears, now dark blue with gold trim, the collar crisp, the boots polished to a fault, belongs to a French emissary. One who now lies bound and gagged in a vineyard cellar somewhere in Lorraine. You don't see the swap happen. No one does. But you do see the effect. A full regiment, nearly 300 men, rises early to await orders from a visiting diplomatic official. They're stationed near the Prussian border. Tensions high, nerves frayed. And as the sun crests the hills, a single rider approaches on a black horse, papers in hand, posture perfect. Claire, she dismounts, presents her forged credentials, and begins issuing orders with the calm confidence of someone who's been doing it for years. Move this battalion east, post scouts here, Delo the courier. Send false intel there. All logical, all reasonable. No one questions her, because the trick isn't pretending to be someone you're not. It's making others doubt they ever knew who that someone really was. Historians still argue whether this was her boldest move, or simply her most theatrical. Some say the regiment never existed. Others claim Claire merely delayed a border crossing. But one archived communication from Napoleon's inner circle read, "Official envoy ordered detour near Metz. Orders contradicted prior dispatch. Delay incurred. Entire regiment missed rendezvous. Investigate possible interference." What that report fails to mention, that those official orders weren't inked in standard blue, but in sepia Claire's signature touch. Quirky fact. The only physical trace left at the scene was a brass button, stamped with a moth insignia, and the word Caligo Latin for mist. Now, let's talk about the guards. There were 6. Armed, sharp, loyal. All reported that the visiting envoy Claire quoted campaign dates, and even complained about rations like her seasoned officer. She gave them wine. Not drugged, not poisoned. Just good wine. Distracting wine. And when she walked out of the camp 6 hours later, dressed again in civilian gray, no one noticed. Until the real envoy was found in the vineyard, tied but unharmed. A rose pinned to his chest. Not black, not red. White. White, in Claire's language, means it's over. You want to believe this is her last act? That she's saying goodbye. But the world doesn't move like that. Especially not hers. Because 2 days later, French troops Prussian scouts go missing, and a field hospital reports the sudden disappearance of its only Legelong, with every name of soldiers being treated for chemical burns. Those burns were from a failed Prussian test of Guess who might have leaked that information? In a lullaby, in a bakery, in a glass of wine, Napoleon hears of the bluff the fake envoy, who walked through a regiment and disappeared. He is, for once, silent. His advisors are not. They demand an investigation, suggest she's become a myth, a panic spread. But he knows better. He once said it himself. The most dangerous enemy is the one who never lifts a sword. You now stand at the edge of a border crossing. The wind is sharp, the sky threatening snow, and a group of soldiers is burning a pile of letters and maps. Among them, one parchment bearing Claire's signature, scent lavender and ink. It reads simply, "I could have taken more, but she didn't." Because Claire doesn't conquer. She disrupts. She corrects. She tiptoes into history, rewrites the margins, then leaves, before anyone notices the footnotes are different. And when you ask yourself where she is now after that final bluff, after walking out of a French encampment in broad daylight, you already know the answer. She's not in hiding, because the final act hasn't ended yet. The village is nameless. At least, you never catch the name on a signpost, tucked between the folds of the Swiss Alps. It's the kind of place that makes no promises to the outside world. One bakery, one church, 24 stone houses clinging to the mountainside like frostbitten toes. It's here, you see her, one last time. She's sitting on a bench outside the tavern, smoking a pipe with the calm of someone who has nothing left to run from. Her cloak is wool, gray, her boots muddy, her hair, loosed from its usual constraints, curled slightly but the eyes, one green, one brown, haven't changed. You pause. She glances up, smiles. "You always find me late," she says. "There's no more need for disguises, no veils, no Latin inscriptions, or secret codes in what." She gestures to the empty seat beside her, and you sit unsure whether to speak. "I'm no one's ghost," she murmurs, exhaling smoke. "Just a poor cartographer of human stupidity." A goat bleats somewhere nearby. Children laugh in the distance. The world, finally, feels ordinary again. And yet, you know what she did, what she undid, what she changed, simply by existing outside the boxes men tried to build for her. She didn't command armies or sign treaties. She just bent the air around people's decisions. She made kings hesitate. She made emperors doubt. She made certainty die quietly. You want to ask her why? Why vanish now? Why here? She looks at you, as if she hears the question without you speaking. Because stories aren't meant to last forever, she says. But legends ... They don't need a final chapter. She stands, brushes snow from her hem, and tosses the last ember of her pipe into the dirt. You blink, and she's gone. No footprints. No shadow turning the corner. Just empty air and the faintest trace of lavender left behind. Historians still argue if this final sighting was real. Some say she died in Prussia. Others claim she retired to Istanbul under yet another name. One theory insists she became a nun. Another says she became an opera singer in Brazil. A few believe she never existed at all. But ask the old man who keeps the tavern in that quiet alpine village, and he'll tell you after his third glass of wine that sometimes, on cold mornings, a woman in grey lights a lantern outside and hums a tune no one remembers learning. Quirky detail. The hymn she hums maps perfectly to a constellation visible only in December. The same constellation Napoleon once referenced in a lost love letter burned. Unknown. Claire's final message is never written, but it's felt in the hesitation of a general. The delayed war. The question no one asks anymore. What if the emperor had known? You rise from the bench. The snow is falling gently now. The wind carries no sound, only weight. The story is over, and it ends the way she always lived. Without permission. Now the fires burn low, and the shadows on your wall look softer than they did an hour ago. Your breath settles. Your mind slows. All the sharp corners of the story begin to blur. Because whether you believe she was real or imagined, Claire Marola, Rose Noir left the world different than she found it. Not through battles, not through fame, but through subtle defiance. Through silence, used like a scalpel. Through the quiet power of being underestimated. It's easy to overlook the small things. A misplaced glove, a song hummed in the wrong key, a smile timed to land just as a general forgets the question he meant to ask. But those are the things that bend history side. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Claire wanted us to remember. That sometimes the loudest forces move in whispers. That disappearance isn't always defeat. That stories left unfinished are the ones we keep retelling. So close your eyes now. Let the mountain air grow colder around you. Let the village fade. Let the black rose crumble in your pocket. You're safe now. The mystery is no longer yours to solve. And somewhere, far from here, a woman in a grey cloak lights a lantern, and vanishes into the snow.